Hey, it's Filter Free Friday, y'all. Listen, I am so glad y'all here. I regret I wasn't on last Friday. I had to work. Can you believe it? Somewhere in 2020, I realized that for my own personal health, that I need to stick to around 50 hours a week or so working. And because I tend to work all the time on the days when I do work, that means that I got to take Friday off. And but I missed y'all. I did get a chance last Friday to go out to the airport and see the digital ad space that was in the baggage claim, and there it was. I wish somebody would have been with me so I could have recorded my exuberance when I drove past the baggage claim area and saw the beautiful aubergine for my new book up there. But I remember this week there's so much going on that it reminded me of one of the first times when I was working as an engineer in the plant, and I always was involved in some kind of extracurricular activity, and I was helping with the United Way for the Leavenworth community when I was working at the manufacturing plant out there. I always thought that town was a little interesting. Whenever you would go out to lunch, you could just kind of see a low level of like sadness and like disconnection in people's eyes. And my friend Brian, at the time, my coworker friend, said, I think it's because there's 5 prisons here, and then there's the military base, and people are, always moving. And so I don't know if they want to make connections, but nonetheless, I was working on the United Way campaign, and I remember that people were filling out actually physical pieces of paper to make their donations. And I was like, man, that's going to take us a long time. We need to make this electronic so we can see how we're doing. We can track it along the way. We'll know where we are like on the day of. And so we set up these little rooms where we are going to have computers because, back when this was happening, there weren't no cell phones. So we had space set up in the plant where you could come in anytime and put in your donation amount, and you're going to get time off the floor in order to do so. And very quickly, I was like, oh God, we have a problem. This sounds like the story of my life. Me realizing kind of at the last minute that some decision I made is just not going to work for everybody. The, um, the people didn't even know how to turn on the computers. And it was also when I learned that there are some very high functioning, really smart people in the world who also cannot read. So back when I had started working in the plant, many people had been working there for 30 years. Back when you didn't have to have a college degree to get that kind of job, and you would get trained on the job. And basically, if you could match two things together, you were going to be exceptional. And if you could see color in a way that other people could not, print it on paper, you were going to make a really good career for yourself. And it was very obvious that we had lots of, or a decent amount of functionally illiterate people. And so some of my little engineering ideas just were not going to work. And that brings me to kind of what I wanted to talk about a little bit today. And just in case you don't know, it's like almost 60% of US citizens are functionally illiterate, meaning that they cannot read and comprehend anywhere beyond a fifth grade level or so. But that brings me to what I wanted to talk about this week, because y'all, this book launch has got me over here all beside myself. Pretty much, I think this is my 7th book. I have written 6 before that. All but one of those was self-published, and it was self-published because I wanted to be able to control it. And also, the process is pretty simple. Let me know if you want me to give you the tea on how to self-publish a book, because I'm so grateful that Alyssa Henley is the one who put me on. I walked into a conference room one day, and she had like 7 books lined up, and I'm like, sis, how you do that? And at the time I didn't have no books, and she told me all the process. And so nothing like paying it forward. But that brings me to kind of what I wanted to talk about today, related to just sometimes not recognizing like what's right in front of you. Like, again, really, really smart people all around me. And because I had an engineering degree, I didn't always think about asking folks for their opinions on what I think is like unrelated and minor. The United Way donation don't have nothing to do with how we're gonna get these 50 million pieces out this week, right? Like, so why I got to pull a team together to figure out how that's gonna go? And I didn't do it and realized that we had literacy problems and realized that we had situations where people did not understand what was going on. And this week, somebody asked me, Nicole, what do you think about artificial intelligence and empathy? Well, quite frankly, don't matter what I think, because the technology is here. People are already engaging with artificial intelligence software that helps their depression go down because the technology figures out how to speak in ways that help them to build their confidence and self-worth. Do I think that AI should replace humans? Absolutely not. I think we are the ones who determine whether or not that is going to happen or not based on what we demonstrate we appreciate. But technology is coming, and if we're resistant to it, it's probably going to have us behind. And when I think about the NFL draft being here in Kansas City this week, I'm not talking about whether or not you agree or disagree with what the NFL is doing or what the Chiefs' name is or isn't. We'll have to talk about that on another day because I only have but so much time. But I'll never forget that it was Jesus himself who testified that a man is not with, does not have honor in his own home, meaning that you're typically not accepted wherever you live. And Felix Anudike Uzoma, being from Lee Summit, which is a suburb of Kansas City, and going to college at Kansas State University, which is 2 hours just west of Kansas City in the state of Kansas, and then being the Chiefs draft pick is kind of unheard of, actually. Um, you pretty much gotta go someplace and do something else in order to be kind of accepted in your own home. And I can't tell you how proud I was to see my ad display up in the Kansas City airport with Kansas City's own at the top. The Forbes people did that, and I really appreciated it. But when you think about Sidney Poitier dying a few years ago, and then Harry Belafonte dying this week, both of them were Caribbean Americans. And a few weeks ago, one of my colleagues, his grandparents are from South America, and he grew up in New York City. But nonetheless, we were at a client event, and someone was trying to explain to him, this is a Black woman trying to explain to him, that Africans, and she was specifically saying Nigerians, don't understand Black people in the US, and therefore can't really understand the problems that were happening in her school. She didn't work at the school. She had a student who goes there. And I remember being disappointed, woefully disappointed, because our fight is a shared fight, number one, and everybody's lived experience. I can't change, my lived experience. I can't change the things that were input into me. I didn't get to decide where I was born. I didn't get to decide who my parents were. I don't get to decide all the billboards I see, all the songs that I listened to growing up, all of the inputs. Our brain is like a filing cabinet, and it holds it all. And therefore, all of those lived experiences, as you get older, you start to learn how they cause you bias, or um, conscious and unconscious. And each of us have incredible amount of work to do to make sure that those biases are not kind of guiding our decisions. And when I think about the fact that Harry Belafonte died this week, and when the Mississippi freedom rides were occurring, this man took what's the equivalent of over $500,000 in cash on a plane to be able to entertain people and fund the freedom rides that summer. You go, yeah, he is one person, and we all have to be real careful about making these blanket statements about who understands us and who doesn't. Because as she was standing there talking to my colleague, not once did she ask him, was he reared here in the States? Not once did she ask him, what was his experience. She was never curious. She just took what she thought about the relationship between Black people um, in America and Black people all around the globe. One of my favorite people to listen to wrote a book called Anti-Racist Organization, Miss Daniels. She's British. And when you read her work, you recognize that our struggle is tied up in her struggle. And what was even more concerning is that this person who was going all in, energy just on 5,000, is a yogi. And so I am when I started out on this empathy walk, one of the first things I had to do was take a good reflective look at myself and say, am I being empathetic to myself? In what ways have I do in what ways do I understand who I am as a person? Um and quite frankly, the 25th of on this week, the day my book was released, was also National DNA Day. And while I have lost a lot of relationships based on my genetic identity discovery, what cannot be disputed is that finding out that my father was not my father at 45 years old broke my heart wide open in a way to help, in fact, caused me, I had a level of anger that I had never had before that helps me understand other people's positions and points of view better. But if I present myself as if I have always been empathetic, if I present myself as if this empathy journey does not require courage, if I present myself as if this breaking open doesn't happen, if I somehow suggest that I'm different from Jesus, who was not accepted in his own home, and that me, I'm going to be accepted for who I am, that's disingenuous. It's hypocrisy. It's the opposite of empathy. You can't do it. It's not possible. This week, this I'm thinking about this book launch. I'm worried about it doing well, mostly because all the other times when I was writing about my work. Even when I wrote The Holy Educated Motherfucker, I wasn't writing about me necessarily. The extra these are things that I feel like if you watch all my filter free Fridays, you can get the information that's in that book. I was not being vulnerable in any way, shape, or form. No way. There was nothing vulnerable about it. It was, if you're paying attention, you can see this information anywhere. But Spark the Heart, during Spark the Heart, I found out that the person for whom I thought I'm his favorite child, my grandmother, who I talk about over and over and over again, who kept saying, keep living, baby. I learned that when she's saying, keep living, baby, what she was saying to me was, honey, there's some things about yourself you don't even know that you better be careful about before you judge what's going on with others. And so this book is special to me in that way because I am being vulnerable. I am sharing all the ways in which I got it wrong. And quite frankly, I'm nervous about it. And what I woke up today thinking was about Felix Enrique Uzoma, because when he said, when he was deciding if he was going to play in the NFL versus staying in college, the reporter asked him, so who helped you make that decision? And he was like, well, I consulted God about it. And the reporter was like, well, who else did you consult? And he was like, nobody. Like, what you talking about? And that's when it was like so clear to me that I need to just release this book. I'm just about to release this book. It's in God's hands now. It's above me now. There ain't nothing else I can do. It's going to be what it's going to be. People going to say what they're going to say. They're going to buy it or they're not. They're going to lean into the workshops and learn how to be logically empathetic, or they won't. I was talking to some clients yesterday because listen, I don't have to, this is not in the book because I don't believe it's necessary for the work. But I didn't just decide that I was going to put a foundation of empathy under everything else I was doing. I didn't just make that decision. It was like a voice in my head over and over and over again saying, all this change stuff you're trying to do ain't going to work unless people are empathetic. All this diversity stuff you're doing ain't going to work if people ain't empathetic. All this race equity and inclusion stuff you're trying to do, it ain't going to work if people are not empathetic. all these strat plans you putting together and SOAR analysis ain't gonna work if people ain't empathetic. And I'm like, man, somebody need to talk about empathy then. Cause who? Like, I'm not the one. I'm the worst person to talk to people about empathy because many times I do not suffer fools, man. You cannot be dumb to me, and I make space to try to understand you. Case in point, this week, colleagues working up in Pennsylvania and advocating for the Gay Student Association to be able to do some very specific things during Pride Week or during what's it called, Spirit Week. Well, it's an LGBTQ student organization. They have one day where they want the students to where they invite other students to dress in drag. Now, I'm imagining that if I put on the makeup to look like a drag performer, that could be actually pretty fun in a wig. I mean, it's a costume. Another day was wearing colors of the rainbow flag. Another day was like royalty or something. And my colleague approved it. And approved it, first of all, approved it because it's federal law. Secondly, why do we act like somebody else wearing a costume or clothes is going to somehow just completely damage our faith or where we are? And even if you do think that, tell me how that snowballs into death threats, harassing phone calls, accusations of pedophilia, suggesting child abuse and harassment, and saying that we're infringing on people's rights. How? How can you go to that place because I don't know what might be the equivalent of 5% of your student body wants to feel good and confident about themselves? One of the hardest places where I'm finding it difficult to do some of the empathy work is honestly with some of my religious cohorts and friends. And I just have to remember that the United Methodist Church is breaking up over this issue. But if you are thinking that children are supposed to go to school to be taught life skills and to be educated in science and math and history and English language arts, do you not also think that what we should be learning in school is how to recognize the inherent dignity and humanity in every person we meet? One of the best designers I have ever known, the person who designed my office, is gay. When I think about when I transitioned from engineering into learning and development, I had zero credentials, none. I liked teaching in class. I had taught some Sunday school lessons from time to time. I didn't have a master's in adult learning. I didn't know how to transfer information to adults. It was Frank Hogue who sat next to me and taught me all about how you time out what you teach, how 150 words is about a minute. That's how you know how long an exercise is going to take. How do you have a session with 100 people and still get out on time? You have to have small group discussions instead of whole group discussions. It was Frank Hogue who taught me that. Frank Hogue at the time had been with his partner for like 20 years. And at the time, Frank Hogue, I wasn't even living with my husband. Okay. And Frank Hogue couldn't get medical benefits, and if something had happened to his partner Bruce, there would be no way for them to be able to support each other because the law was against it. And I'm just like, how can you make sense of that? And what the lack of empathy I've ever seen is, I don't need to make sense of that. God said it's wrong. Like, just I'm just going, it is the antithesis of empathy. And I don't know what else to tell you except for God told me that we need an empathy revolution in this country and that Kansas City, as the heart of the nation, can be the spark of empathy throughout the nation. And I have no idea how this is going to work. And most of the reason why I have no idea how this is going to work because Jerry Springer died this week. And Jerry Springer is in my news feed more than Harry Belafonte. And I cannot understand how do we get there. We are driven by what's negative. And I'm talking in just sweeping generalizations here. When maybe I don't have $60,000 worth of cash to hop on a plane and fund the Freedom Summer, but I can do something. And when people sit back, like what happened this week, I went to talk to a few clients about the lead workshop, which is the empathetic one. And listen, I can all my other workshops, they just fly off the shelves. This one, people are like, mm, I mean, what we gonna do about, you know, poor people? What we gonna do about abuse? What we gonna do about this? What we gonna do about that? How we gonna fix this? How we gonna fix that? I'm like, your job is to run this organization. And within your four walls, how can we help you and your team be more empathetic to the people who are on your staff? It's a level of focus that I'm trying to be like, and they like, but what about, what about, what about? And before the excuse was, well, I mean, we can't use this book because it's got the F-bomb on it, so that's why, because this book about empathy, before it was, well, we can't really say culture, or we can't say diversity, or we can't say inclusion because there's all these laws against it. You're not even funded by the federal government. You're not using any vendors of the federal government. Why? You're not in a state where this is true. You have some constituents who are saying they are against it, and because you lack leadership courage, you will not take the next right step, which is to help close the gaps that people have in their competency toolkit. Because leadership without empathy is horrible leadership. I'm sitting here flat-footed, feet on the ground. I will not take it back. Leadership without empathy is horrible leadership. You cannot be a good leader of people without the ability to look at another person and understand what their situations and circumstances are and recognize that whatever they think, feel, and believe makes total sense to them. It's information. It helps you make better, more informed decisions. If I go and see the people sitting in the room at the plant and I learn that they can't read, and I see that, oh, I already knew these people were smart. I already knew they were smart. But I see that they don't understand how to turn on the computer, let alone fill in a document on the computer. If I won't go and see, how am I gonna get the information? And when we start thinking about how people are treating the LGBTQ folks in this country, especially the T, I'm telling you, the strategies don't change, sugar. I'm having lunch with Dr. John Martin today. He's 80 years old. The Monday Nighters have been meeting for over 50 years every Monday here in Kansas City to talk about football, and none of them are experiencing the draft activities in person because the operation is not really inclusive to old people. We didn't consider accessibility for how old people were going to get down there. We didn't consider accessibility for where they would sit, that they can't stand in long lines, probably, that I even understand that in some places there were some wheelchair access problems. Why do I bring that up? Because if blessed, if lucky, if you're not religious, we all gonna live to be 80. And so it's a level of discrimination against our future selves. And so if we are willing to discriminate against our future selves, let me double down. All of us have been young at some point. All of us know what it's like to be young people who no one is listening to, that people think something wrong with, that people forget that when they were young, they were reading Toni Morrison and Maya Angelou and To Kill a Mockingbird, and you were being exposed to these sexual scenes, and Not only did it open your mind, it helped you to learn better how to read. It broke your heart open and gave you an empathetic view into the lives of people who were poor, into the lives of people who might have been Black, into the lives of people who might have been lesbian. Because we know the late great Dr. Maya Angelou did not know exact. She did experiment with her sexuality before she landed on, you know what? I think I'm straight. And if you are unwilling to allow that type of mental rigor with children, and you were a child once who wanted to experiment with that level of mental rigor, you discriminating against something you were. And I am just vehemently opposed to this idea that, oh, when I push out the idea that we need to be inclusive, that we need to be equitable, that I mean, for some people, here's what I know for sure. Hatefulness is winning because hatefulness don't have to get tired. When you think about most of the life of Jerry Springer, most of the life of Jerry Springer was pulling people on television to fight about all kinds of things. In his later years, when he's the mayor up in Minneapolis or wherever he was in Minnesota, we don't know nothing about that. Nothing about that. But what I think the world would be a better place if we spend some time learning more about the likes of Harry Belafonte, who gave us almost 100 years worth of dedication to entertainment and showing us that joy is an act of resistance. He had the first album by a single solo artist that sold 1 million records. He was an entertainer. And yet, when Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King wrote the letter from the Birmingham jail, it was Harry Belafonte who bailed him out. Why? Because Harry Belafonte understood very, very clearly that there's no way for me to entertain without the likes of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. I couldn't even be here. We keep thinking we are individuals. We are connected. We are connected. And so here in my own home, I am excited that I am actually accepted here. I think. My hope is, though, that I can, through sharing all the ways that I get it wrong, help more and more people think about how they can embrace this ridiculous idea that we can believe what we believe, live solidly in our values, and not be threatened by the likes of another person. Until well-meaning people buy into this idea, all of this hatefulness that we're seeing, the likes of Tucker Carlson, who knows that he's spewing lies and falsities, that an 88-year-old woman could never have received justice for lying so much that a Black boy who was 14 years old was murdered. You know, Carolyn Bryant just dying this week should be a beautiful reminder to us that these things are not so long ago. When you see that black and white picture of Emmett Till, you think to yourself, this was so long ago. Oh no, honey, my great uncle Henry, who just died last year, was the same age as Emmett Till and living only 20 minutes away in Mississippi. These things are not old. They are the same and true over and over and over and over again. I'm redirecting my energy away from the hatefulness. I can't do anything about it. But for those of us who are sitting around wondering if our curtains match our carpet, maybe we can get you to do just one thing, to think about somebody beyond yourself. And to do just one thing for the life of somebody who is being left out and left behind and treated poorly. If you are attracted to same-sex relationships, wonderful. If you're not, why are you threatened? It's a question you have to ask yourself. Why do you feel threatened about someone who is? For me, this is just me. This is not an empathetic statement. This is just me expressing me. I don't care if it was against the law. I love men. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to be with men. And through that understanding, I understand why people are doing whatever it takes to be with the people they love. The fact that you think that someone else can just choose to do something different, sit with that for a little bit. Work that through in your mind, sugar. Consider James Baldwin and tell me that the world was not better because he lived and did not hide that he was homosexual. You won't put him up and share his quotes and read his books? And meanwhile, when we out here spewing God did not make Adam and Steve, my question is, who did then? Who did? Who did? It's Filter Free Friday, y'all. We got work to do.